And good morning, brothers. It's good to be with you again. Let's get started. I want to begin with a poem by Rainer Maria Rilke. I live my life in widening circles that reach out across the world. I may not complete this last one, but I give myself to it. I circle around God, around that primordial tower. I've been circling for thousands of years and I still don't know. Am I a falcon, a storm, or a great song? Am I a falcon, a storm, or a great song? Brothers, it's important in this work, in this race relations work, that we take good care of ourselves. So I want to begin this morning with a brief meditation to help us to get in a good heart space. So I invite you to sit comfortably, put your feet firmly on the ground, sit up straight. Maybe your hands are on your knees or your thighs, palms down or up, whatever's most comfortable. And take a couple deep breaths. Close your eyes and begin to center yourself. I invite you to notice your body and how you're feeling as we get started. Start by becoming aware of yourself and focusing on your feelings of peace, calm, and tranquility. Then let these feelings grow into strength and confidence. Give yourself this gift in this time, and let them develop into love within your heart. You might even imagine like there's a golden light that's flooding your body right now. Or you may say a phrase to yourself like, may I be well and happy. May I be well and happy. And repeat that to yourself. Now I invite you to bring to mind a good friend. Bring them to mind as vividly as you can, and think of their good qualities. Feel your connection with your friend and your liking for them. And say to yourself on their behalf, may they be well, may they be happy. You can also use an image such as a shining light from your heart into theirs. I now invite you to think of somebody that you do not particularly like or dislike. You're somewhat indifferent towards. Your feelings are neutral with this person. This may be someone you do not know well, but see around on occasion. I invite you to reflect on their humanity and include them in your feelings of loving kindness. Again, may they be well. May they be happy. You might imagine the light again shining from your heart into theirs. Now think of someone that you actually dislike, an enemy. Someone that when you think of them, it becomes difficult. But try not to get caught up in your feelings of hatred or dislike in this time. Think of them as positively as you can, and send to them as well your loving kindness. May they be well. May they be happy. Again, can you imagine the light shining from your heart into theirs? And now I invite you to think of all four of these people together, yourself, your friend, the person for whom you have neutral feelings, and the one for whom you feel bad when you think of, perhaps an enemy. Then extend your feelings even further to everyone around you, to everyone joined together in this session today. to all in your neighborhood, in your town, your country, throughout the world. Can you imagine that light shining from you, from these others, into everyone else that you imagine? Have a sense of waves of loving kindness spreading from your heart to everyone, to all beings everywhere. Now I invite you, brothers, to gradually relax out of this meditation and bring the practice to an end. Come back to this moment, into the group. Your eyes open again. You awake, coming from this place of loving kindness deep within yourself. We need to start in this deep, loving place, brothers, because today we're going to dive a bit deeper into the topic that we opened last night, a difficult topic: racism, white privilege, and the systemic inequities and individual habits that mock our claim to be a healthy society and purveyors of mature masculinity. I remind us that this is hard work, brothers. It brings up insecurities, past traumas, feelings of guilt, shame, anger, and all that's very normal. So it's important that you pay attention to your bodies this morning, to regularly check in with yourself. How are you feeling? What are you feeling? Where are you feeling it? Notice it in your bodies. Are you feeling uncomfortable, confused, defensive, critical? Try not to shut down, brothers, but keep breathing. If you notice yourself becoming defensive, just try to sit with that without fixing it, without having to change it. If you need to stand up or move around a little bit, feel free. But try to stay as present as you can and in this work. I want to share a quote that I came across recently. This is by a poet and a professor of English at New York University, a man named Terrence Hayes, who has a book out called American Sonnets for My Past and Future Assassin. He writes, "When the wound is deep, the healing is heroic. Suffering and ascendance require the same work. When the wound is deep, the healing is heroic. Suffering and ascendance require the same work." I want to explore that this morning with you, brothers. 5 years ago, I was serving a large mainline church in a predominantly white, rural, middle-class community of central Pennsylvania. I'd been there for 21 good years, but ready for a change. I was feeling the need for something different. I was discerning at that time a call to leave to become a part of a residential ecumenical Christian community in Richmond, Virginia, called Richmond Hill. I'd long felt a connection with Benedictine spirituality and communal living, and I was doing spiritual formation work in and out of the church, a lot of that with you men. My children had grown and recently moved out of the house, and our family had developed several connections with Africa over the years, including a sabbatical in Togo together 20 years ago. All those things were relevant to my desire to come to Richmond Hill, but the final decision was more of a leap of faith than anything else. At some point, I simply had to leap and trust that the net would appear. And so I did. In February of 2016, my wife and I made a 5-year commitment to Richmond Hill. We sold the home on the cul-de-sac where we raised our 3 sons. We got rid of 3/4 of everything we owned, and we moved to Richmond. It was a hard transition. The first couple of years were disorienting. Everything that I felt secure about began to fall away, and not easily. My self-image, my confidence, even my faith was shaken. Every time I turned the corner, I would come face to face with my own shadow, seeing in others the very thing I couldn't see or wasn't willing to confront in myself. I learned from a visiting monk once who said that life in monastic community is about discovering that everyone you live with is an asshole. And then one day waking up to find that there really is only one asshole, and that's you. Me in this case. Adjusting to communal life was exhausting. I often felt like I was gasping for breath, weary from trying to keep my head above the surface. Eventually, I simply had to learn to breathe underwater. I don't know how else to describe it, brothers. You add a pandemic and widespread racial unrest to all that, and you've got the makings of a pretty interesting life. I'd like to share my screen with you now. And once I do that, you can double click on the picture that comes up, and it will enlarge that for you if you'd like to have that a little more prominent on your screen. So brothers, welcome to Richmond Hill. This is the house that I now live in, not just by myself, but with some others. This house was originally built in 1811. The upper floor and the cupola you see on top was added in the mid-1800s, and a young 9-year-old boy who was living there during the Civil War watched the city burn from that site atop the city. Richmond Hill is an ecumenical residential retreat center and historic monastery in the heart of what was once the capital of the Southern Confederacy. Our mission is to seek the healing of metropolitan Richmond through prayer, hospitality, spiritual development, and racial reconciliation. We sit on the highest hill in Richmond, overlooking the James River and historic Shockoe Bottom, which is the valley below, with a view of Thomas Jefferson's Capitol building on the next hill over. American history is palpable from here. We sit just 2 blocks from St. John's Episcopal Church, which is one of the oldest congregations in this country. It's the site where Patrick Henry gave his "Give me liberty or give me death" speech, which helped inspire the American Revolution. Just a few blocks in the other direction is the site where on October 10th of 1800, exactly 220 years ago last Saturday, Gabriel Prosser was hung for mounting a rebellion of his own, echoing Patrick Henry's words for African Americans. It's a reminder, brothers, that liberty and justice has never been for all in this country. The story of the American Revolution that we see from atop Richmond Hill remains only a half revolution. The residential community that we're a part of is racially inclusive. This is a picture from several years ago of residents who were here at that time. But the community here humbly believes that if we can get it right, if we can live together in harmony, black and white together, which we don't always do well, I can attest to, but if we can keep trying and in our best moments get it right, maybe our neighborhood can do that too, or our city and possibly the surrounding metropolitan area. And who knows, maybe someday our entire nation will turn things around. We work for that change for sure, as impossible as it sometimes feels. And we pray for it 3 times a day in this historic chapel that's also a part of our community. But we're not the first to pray here, brothers. In 1866, a group of nuns were invited from Baltimore to come and establish a convent devoted to the reconstruction of Richmond following the devastation of the city at the end of the Civil War. Prior to that, there's anecdotal evidence that indigenous people prayed here too, this being high ground where the evening sun can be seen setting over what was known then as the Powhatan River, after their chief and king. This past Monday, we celebrated Indigenous Peoples Day, a reminder to us at Richmond Hill that we continue to stand on sacred ground. But part of what makes it holy is the blood, sweat, and tears that have been poured into it. In the 1600s, European settlers arrived, and it wasn't long before erroneous deals were made and wars were waged, which led to the genocide of those who once called this place home. They were forcefully removed from the land. At nearly the same time, others were forcefully brought here from their homeland in Africa. Just in the last year, we've learned the names of several of the people who were enslaved by the early landowners of this property. They include Chloe and Beck, Gabriel, Billy, Dolly, Lucy, Jemmy, Jenny, Kate, Abram, and Tamar. And there were many more. Brothers, race is a social construct codified in the Virginia slave codes of 1705 to justify chattel slavery. It's also been called a condition, a disease, a card, a plague, and our nation's original sin. Between 1820 and 1860, that sin took the shape of the downriver slave trade in Richmond. During that time, Richmond was home to the largest interstate slave market in the world. It's estimated that over 500,000 people were bought and sold in the valley just a few blocks from where I am. This picture was taken from Richmond Hill in 1865 by Matthew Brady, whom you'll probably know from Ken Burns' documentary on the Civil War. Most of what you see was devoted to the slave trade in one form or another. I mentioned the 27 blocks to Richard last night. What you see are houses, auction houses, cell blocks, restaurants, department stores, and hotels, all that were involved in the buying and selling of human beings. Solomon Northup, of 12 Years a Slave fame, passed through here in 1841 before being transported to New Orleans and then sold into slavery himself. The area in the center of this picture, straight down the street where you see the horses and buggies, or wagons rather, is the site of Lumpkin's Jail, owned by notorious slaveholder Robert Lumpkin. Enslaved Africans referred to Lumpkin's compound as the Devil's Half Acre because of the abusive conditions and brutal treatment that many received. Ironically, after the Civil War, his common law wife, Mary Lumpkin, who happened to be black, inherited his property and assets and eventually leased the facilities to the Reverend Nathaniel Culver, who was a black pastor who wished to educate the formerly enslaved. Started in what had been a notorious slave jail, the Culver Institute eventually became Virginia Union University, one of our nation's historic black colleges. The Devil's Half Acre became God's half acre, a story of remarkable redemption. Transformation continues, brothers. But within 30 years of emancipation and the end of the Civil War, the Daughters of the Confederacy began to construct large monuments to the lost cause, symbols of Confederate days when Virginia and other southern states sought to secede from the Union. They were imposing statues built to intimidate and perpetuate white supremacy. But as you probably heard, this summer they started coming down, the result of an outcry over police brutality that led to the deaths of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and George Floyd. The removal of so many Confederate symbols from this city seemed impossible only a few months ago. But removing statues isn't enough. The more significant artifacts of the Confederacy are lingering forms of oppression and inequity that plague this city. Things like poorly managed public housing complexes, inadequate public transportation, and public schools that are drastically underfunded. I've been describing Richmond, but similar things can be said of metropolitan areas across this country. Today, there is renewed hope that change is possible, largely due to the liminal space that we find ourselves in due to the pandemic and efforts that young activists are making to address racial disparities that go back to our nation's origin. At Richmond Hill, we've chosen to see this time as an opportunity to look more closely and critically at ourselves. Brothers, this past summer, we celebrated the 125th anniversary of the dedication of our chapel. And in researching its beginnings, we learned more about the beneficiaries. Ida Mary Berry Ryan, pictured here, was the wife of tobacco tycoon Thomas Fortune Ryan. They were the Bill and Melinda Gates of their time. They were devoted Catholics, and they built the cathedral here in Richmond. And visiting the city in 1894, Ida Ryan stopped by to surprise the convent by awarding them with a check of $5,000 to build this chapel. It's the place where we still pray 3 times a day. She also made it clear that no funds were to benefit colored work. We're not sure how that influenced the sisters, but it's part of our story, a part of the story that needs to be told. We've learned too that Richard Adams, who built a home on this site in 1790 and also was responsible, his son was, for building the house that I now live in. This is the house that was here when the sisters moved to Richmond in 1866. Richard Adams was also a colonist and a slave trader. He himself owned over 100 slaves, 18 of whom likely lived and worked here or nearby on this hill. He and his brother Tom were responsible for organizing 25 slave ships from Africa to the American colonies. For a long time, there's been speculation that a structure on our property may have been a place where the enslaved lived. A year ago, we were able to bring in preservation architect Joby Hall, who helped restore the Sally Hemings home at Monticello, to investigate this part of our property. She's found evidence that all but confirms that it was indeed a slave house. I'm learning there's more to my own story too. I told you about Pam Smith last night. She moved to Richmond Hill a year ago from Chicago, and she's involved with the Coming to the Table organization that brings together ancestors of slaveholders and those enslaved by them. She's taught me that one of the best ways to change a person's perspective on race is to do your own genealogical work, to know where you come from. She was telling me about her own family roots in slavery when she mentioned that her mom's family was from a small town in central Missouri. I'm from Missouri, I told her. Where's your mom from? Moberly, she said, and my jaw dropped. Moberly is where my mother grew up. It's a small farming community about 30 miles north of Columbia. The likelihood of our families having crossed paths seems extremely high. We need to explore that. I've long considered myself a Northerner, but I have learned that I have ties to Northern Kentucky as well. My dad recently told me that he heard growing up that we were related to Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, also from Kentucky. Now, we've not been able to substantiate that, but why would somebody in our family even say that? What if it's true? I was born in Martinsville, Indiana, not too far from Kentucky, in a town where my grandfather and great-grandfather grew up. I never met either of them, but I was always proud to know that my grandfather grew up with John Wooden, the famous college basketball coach. He's seated second from the right. Their high school team won the state championship. My grandfather's nickname was Chubby, which might be why he's not in this picture. I've since learned, brothers, that Martinsville was also a hotspot for the KKK. It was also a notorious sundown town, which I had never heard of until recently, where blacks were warned to not be seen after dark or else. I'm telling you all this because I didn't think racism was a part of my story, but it is. It's likely a part of your story too, in one form or another. The past 5 years have been a great learning for me. Living here has helped me recognize the impact of white culture on my own development. It's helped me become aware of my own racial biases, and it's helped me to see how not confronting racism is racist in and of itself. I mentioned last night that our community is reading Ibram X. Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Kendi says that because we have all, regardless of the color of our skin, grown up in white supremacy culture, remember, brothers, it's the air we breathe and the water we're swimming in. We are all capable of behaving in ways that are racist or anti-racist. The good news, he says, is that the labels racist and anti-racist are not fixed identities. We can be a racist one minute and an anti-racist the next. You're going to have to read the book. What we say about race, what we do about race in each moment determines what, not who, we are. This diagram has been helpful in pointing out areas of growth for me. Check out the widening circles. I'm curious to know where you see yourself on this diagram. What work do you need to do to move from fear to learning to growth? Brothers, I still have a lot of work to do and a lot to learn. I have to move beyond the labels that I often hide behind. Statements like I'm open-minded, progressive, an ally, and friend, so that I can step in further to this work. You can do it too, brothers. It's time that white cultural attitudes, biases, and systems were confronted. To do that, you'll need to develop resilience, a depth of capacity, peace of mind, strength of heart, and a willingness to take wise action. We all have work to do if we're going to live into our lumen vision of becoming a community of men who are radically inclusive. It's going to require relinquishing outward power and finding strength internally. It's going to require a new consciousness, unlike the one that brought us to this moment. So maintaining our contemplative practices is critical. And it's going to require that each of us trust that life is not personal, permanent, or perfect. I wish I had time to unpack that. Life is not personal, permanent, or perfect. Let me stop sharing my screen. That statement I learned from Ruth King, who is an African-American Buddhist monk. And she's got a book called Mindful of Race, and she talks about the importance of contemplative practice and the importance of our doing this work and remembering not to take it personally when it doesn't go well. All right, brothers. We're in a seismic moment in our world and in our life right now. The pandemic and the time of social unrest is providing us with a unique opportunity to do this work. The important thing now is to start with yourself. There is a power in your own story, brothers, in your own narrative. Learn about your own family history. Get in touch with your own experience with race and racism. History is not the past, writes James Baldwin. It is the present. We carry our history with us. We are our history. We need to recognize the ways in which all of us are connected to the history of race in this country. For those of us who identify as white, now is the time to stand up and speak out if you haven't already. Racism is a problem we have to help solve. It's not the responsibility of our black and brown brothers and sisters. If we each commit to confronting the racism right in front of us, that'll be a good start. The work begins right where we are. We have more agency than we realize. To exercise it, though, is going to take courage. Brene Brown says that we can choose courage or we can choose comfort, but you can't choose both at the same time. We've got to be willing to get in the arena, she says. But if we do, we better know that we have signed up to get our asses kicked. I can certainly attest to that. Brothers, this is hard work and it comes with a price. Without going into details, I can say that I've been misunderstood, I've been ignored, I've been lied to, I've been betrayed, I've been falsely accused and not trusted. I've had to learn that all of that goes with the territory of being a white man in authority. And given the history of the abuse that white men have exercised, I understand. Still, it can be discouraging at times. Some days I have to admit I don't know why I'm here. But on my better days, I remember something that many of you have taught me, that my life is not about me. And when life gets hard, I try to remember it is even harder when the whole system is working against you and telling you that your life is of less value than someone else's. And though I know that I'm not really in control, I trust that the best critique of the bad is still the practice of the better. So I'm trying to do what I can. I guess, brothers, that what I'm trying to say is that it all boils down to my realizing that I have a responsibility for thinking of more than just myself. And that as a white man in this country, my position, my privilege, and my power provide me a platform to work for change. And I can't seem to get the words of Martin Luther King Jr. out of my mind, words he wrote from the Birmingham jail. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I believe that's true, that we're all in this together, regardless of the color of our skin. Still, the project of dismantling structural racism is way bigger than any one of us. But it starts with each of us, each one of us, in our own hearts and in our own spirits. If we can be open to changing and growing ourselves, we can have a ripple effect on those around us. Maybe our families will change, our neighborhoods, our places of work. Pretty soon those circles will connect and eventually whole communities could be different. I'm crazy enough to believe it's possible, brothers. I live my life in widening circles that reach out across the world. I may not complete this last one, but I give myself to it. Am I a falcon? Am I a storm? Or am I a great song? I hope you'll give yourself to it, brothers. Leap, and the net will appear. The healing of this wound needs your help. Okay. We're going to move to counsel shortly, but before we do, I want you to take a deep breath and to notice how you're feeling. What's coming up for you? You don't have to fix it. You don't have to change it. Just notice what you're feeling in your body right now. You might even place your hand on your stomach and just gently rub above your navel. Become aware of your body and aware of your breathing, and keep breathing and release and let go. Be present, brothers, as you're able to this moment in this work. We're going to go out into nature again. So if you have a pen handy in your journal or your notes for the wander, you might want to grab those just to jot a couple things or to highlight some things that I share here. This work of going out into nature is an important part of what we believe is necessary for us to continue to grow and to mature and to move to that place of awakening, to raise our consciousness, to trust that nature can teach us what we need and give us exactly what we need. Howard Thurman, as I mentioned last night, was fond of talking to the oak tree in his backyard in Florida as a boy. That tree, he said, in trusting me and listening to me, helped me believe that Jesus just might do the same. Go out, brothers, with the expectation that there is a place waiting for you that is natural and authentic and ready to speak. But you have to be open and receptive. The ancients wrote that once upon a time, a disciple asked the elder, "How shall I experience my oneness with creation?" And the elder answered, "By listening." The disciple pressed the point, "But how am I to listen?" And the elder taught, "Become an ear that pays attention to every single thing that the universe is saying. And the moment you hear something you yourself are saying, stop." Go out, brothers, as a guest on the land and be welcomed by what you see, what you hear, what you encounter. Wait for an invitation and then a welcome. Don't center yourself out there. White supremacy culture would tell you to take an anthropocentric position in the world, particularly as a man. Consciously choose not to do that during this exercise. Trust that there are things greater than you. Bear in mind that there are two ways to move through the world, as if we were connected to it like a leaf to a tree, or as if we were a universe unto ourselves. Listening with the ears of a rabbit is essential to the choice, brothers. To move through the world with an open heart and open mind and a willingness to put the small self aside will connect us to the rest of the human race and to the rest of creation in a way that is reverential and mutual. Try it out. There is a place out there for you. But there is also a place for the trees and the grass and the birds and the air and every other human being. All have value. When we refuse to relinquish space, when we consume all the space of our worlds with our own sounds and our own truths and our own wisdom and our own ideas, there is no room for anyone or anything else. Brothers, it's time that we make room. Mutual respect and appreciation and a humble stance are a good place to start to reclaim our rightful place in the family of things. Brothers, I have with me a beggar's bowl. It's made of wood, it's modest, and it's simple. It is typically used to collect food from those willing to share. But it can also serve as a humble reminder to go out open and ready to receive what is needed. You are to go out open to receive exactly what you need in this time. So wander the land outside wherever you are, the farm, your yard, the city sidewalks, the woods beside your home. The important thing is for you to be outside, to take nothing with you but your journal, no food, no phone, nothing that will distract you from connecting with the more than human world as it appears before you. Once you walk out the door, don't enter another man-made structure until you return. You're being asked to go out for an hour. Afford yourself that opportunity. Stay out there that long. And when you feel like it's time to come back, stay just a little bit longer. Give yourself the full hour if you can. Venture out to a wild and semi-wild place, a park, somewhere where few people congregate if possible. If others are around, do your best in this time to ignore them. You're going to have a conversation, not with another human, but with another being. Go with the assurance of the one who offered yourself that kindness and peace and tranquility at the beginning of this talk, that generative one in you. Go with that one, the one who loves you unconditionally, the one who offers you forgiveness, mercy, and grace. Go with the awareness that that strong presence is in and of you. Now, here's a critical piece of this morning's wander, or today's wander. You're to wander until you find a thing or a place that you feel is wounded. It might be an empty animal hole or a mine shaft, a scattering of bones, a scar in the earth or a tree, a bulldozed site, a pile of trash, or a place infested with what appear to you to be weeds. Don't proceed to the next step until you find a spot or a thing that truly feels wounded to you, whether or not it's objectively wounded, and that evokes from you an empathic and emotional response of sorrow or compassion. Sit with that thing or place, open all your senses to it, and tune into your emotions. What's evoked in you? Fully take it in. Out loud, tell it what you observe, feel, and imagine that it's like to be in its condition, or to have suffered what it has, or to represent what it does. Attend to the flow of your emotions. Make notes in your journal if this feels helpful to you. Now, from that place of loving kindness within yourself, I want you to speak out loud to this thing or this place about your own woundedness, past or present, physical, psychological, social, or spiritual. Tell a story about a wound that you have. How were you wounded? What happened? What's it been like to live with that wound? Be sure to speak to the wounded place or thing. Take the time to do this thoroughly. Again, you can journal anything that comes up. Next, speak to this place or thing about the wound of racism in your life. How have you experienced it? In what ways have you been shaped by the experience of growing up in a culture that centers whiteness and values certain bodies over others? Perhaps the realization of this is new to you. Admit that to this place or thing. Be honest about your ignorance as well as your growing awareness. Next, and only after doing the above thoroughly, fill in the space in which you sit with this question. What would it look like for me to heal from the wound of white supremacy? What would it look like for me to heal from the wound of white supremacy? If your strategic mind generates an answer, congratulate it, and then, evoking the resources of your generative self, keep filling in the space with a question, not trying to get an answer. With the awareness of your kind-hearted self, attend carefully to what happens, both in the world around you and within your own emotions and imagination. There's no need to receive an answer, brothers, but one may arrive on its own. More likely and better than an answer, however, is a response. Something curious you observe in your surroundings, or a feeling, an image, a memory, an insight, a revelation. Then, employing the resources of your creative self, embody, express, and/or respond to what happens within or without, using words or gestures or movement or verse or song, chant or drawing. In some way, give something back. Record your discoveries in your journal before coming back to your council session. All right, brothers. Your wandering will begin in about 10 minutes, and then at the next hour, we'll regroup with one another for our council circles. Those of us that are leading councils, we're council carriers. If we could meet briefly with Ned at the Zoom site that we've been given right after this sending, that would be helpful for us to go over a few things together. Okay, I invite you to hear these final words and then you're off. This is the poem entitled The Waking by Theodore Retke. The Waking. I wake to sleep and take my waking slow. I feel my fate in what I cannot fear. I learn by going where I have to go. We think by feeling, what is there to know? I hear my being dance from ear to ear. I wake to sleep and take my waking slow. Of those so close beside me, which are you? God bless the ground. I shall walk softly there and learn by going where I have to go. Light takes the tree, but who can tell us how? The lowly worm climbs up a winding stair. I wake to sleep and take my waking slow. Great nature has another thing to do to you and me. So take the living air and lovely learn by going where to go. This shaking keeps me steady, I should know. What falls away is always and is near. I wake to sleep and take my waking slow. I learn by going where I have to go.